Welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. As President Joe Biden signs the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I'll be speaking with Andy Doctoroff, a friend of the podcast and repeat visitor. In addition to his work overseeing the building of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, Andy has a particularly interesting perspective on this bill and what it means because of a class he created and has been teaching at the law school at the University of Michigan, which focuses on infrastructure investment, innovative contracting, P3s, all kinds of things. I've been privileged to speak to his class a couple of times, and I'm always impressed with the good questions and how engaged the students are and how interested they are in things that some of us might think are boring to real people. So Andy, thanks for taking time to do this.
Hi, Jeff. You're welcome. Happy to be here again.
So let's start, I guess, high level. I know that high level, there's people that want to parse the numbers and say that it's really not a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. It's actually a $550 billion bill because that's the new money. $550 billion is still a heck of a lot of money to put into the system over 5 years. What have you learned about this as you've been studying it and talking about it in your classes?
What I've learned is a few things. First and foremost is that it is an historically significant infrastructure bill. In one piece of legislation, it allocates more money adjusted for inflation than did the interstate road legislation that was clearly landmark legislation in the 1950s. Now, they're very different bills, of course, because this piece of legislation allocates money to lots of different priorities in infrastructure assets, whereas the interstate highway program focused largely on one thing. So you can't compare apples and oranges, but this legislation really is the federal government's, for the first time in generations, saying we've got a real obligation to look at our infrastructure, to improve our infrastructure without relying on what some would consider gimmicks, including private sector participation that is unclear. That's not to say, Jeff, that this gets us to everywhere we need to go in terms of all of our infrastructure assets. This bill doesn't do that, but it is a significant long stride in that direction.
Well, I guess another important difference between this and the interstate bills is that, those were done under a Republican president, and the efforts in the Senate were led by a Democratic senator by the name of Al Gore Sr.
Yep, that is a big difference.
Talk about what you've learned about this willingness to invest. You've taken a hard look at China, obviously, where we all know, they're building high-speed rail, new roads, pretty much everything, planes, trains, automobiles, and we're fighting over, much smaller amounts. I mean, put that in context for us.
Well, one of the things in my class that we look at is, infrastructure in autocratic countries versus infrastructure in democracies, Western countries. And there really is a huge world of difference. And, on one level, there's almost like infrastructure envy when you look at the autocratic countries like China, which is capable of, conjuring out of thin air a global strategy called the Belt and Road Initiative that, is, contemplated to result in investments anywhere between $1 trillion and $8 or $9 trillion in just a few short years. And that, Belt and Road Initiative mirrors what China has done domestically, which is to invest in high-speed rail, road building, to such an extent that we in America can't even fathom that. In the last few years, China has built 22,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, and America has done 0. And similarly, in the last few years, in a 3-year period, China used more cement than United States did throughout the entire 20th century. So the scale of what China is doing because of its autocratic government will simply blow people away when you appreciate that scale. That said, there are lots and lots of downsides to the Chinese system, to an autocratic system, in terms of white elephants, inefficiency, lack of accountability, a lot of default and debts by local governments. The list goes on and on and on. So there really is, at the end of the day, a question, if you're just looking at infrastructure and not the implications, of course, of living in an autocratic governing system, which one is better or not better. And the truth of the matter is both systems have a lot of advantages and disadvantages.
So when you think about that, the efficiencies and that idea of getting the money out, and you always hear the terms shovel ready, and that's what you heard during the IIJA infrastructure plan in the late 2000s, the American Rescue and Recovery Act, and what you're hearing now. How do you balance that? And how do you advise, I guess, governments to balance what you're talking about is absolutely true. And I know you've cited examples in your class about, the big dig in Boston and, especially Robert Moses' aggressive highway and bridge building, taking out buildings. And in the end, it actually made gridlock worse, not better. So how do you advise people to spend the money quickly, but judiciously?
Well, I personally believe that there are a lot of oversight mechanisms that we can adopt that would make our decision making more informed and more efficient. And frankly, when it comes to infrastructure, those metrics, do not exist, nor is there any analytic bureaucracy that allows us to contextualize infrastructure investments and adopt and recognize best practices. So there are a lot of things that governments can do to, ensure that if there is a shovel-ready project or any other project, they're operationalized or implemented, as efficiently and as well as possible. My personal opinion, though, is it all comes down to leadership. It all comes down to leadership at all levels of the government and at all levels of a specific individual project. And leadership has certain attributes, and we can get into how I personally see that. But you have to have people who are paying attention to details, people who are communicating, building relationships, forging alignments, forging trust, and communicating, avoiding groupthink, avoiding siloed discussions. And if you have all of those things happening, the likelihood, and history does clearly support this, of having optimal results is greatly increased.
So that brings me to something else that's in your portfolio, and that's being the point person for the state, the non-DOT point person for the state, helping to be a liaison with Canada as we jointly build this bridge between Canada and the U.S., the Gordie Howe International Bridge. And what has that brought to you in terms of what you can share with your class and talk about in your class and make them, more enlightened about what goes on with a modern day bridge building project like that?
Well, obviously, I've worked on the Gordie Howe, which is a success, and I've worked on other projects that have not been nearly as successful, and not in Michigan, outside of Michigan. And ultimately, it does come down to alignment, because if the parties, have that alignment as to what the goal is, what are we trying to do, then that alignment creates what I would consider trust. And once that trust is there, then the building blocks for resolving the inevitable thorny problems that arise in any complicated infrastructure project will be there too, so that those problems become less intractable. And once you have the alignment that creates trust and a shared mission, then you have to worry, and I would say the word worry is the correct word, about how people actually get along. Are they availing themselves of expertise? Are they communicating in a way that facilitates the identification and resolution of problems? And I really have learned over the years that there's no shortcut. You can't just look at an org chart or a spreadsheet and say, oh, the solution lies right there. We can see it. It involves people to people interactions, not just building, but exploiting the trust that exists from lots of shared experiences and alignments between governments and other stakeholders to make sure that you're on the same page and you have a view of the same North Star.
So when you say that, the Gordie Howe's a success, why don't you take a minute to provide an update on, where things are right now?
Well, or it's a project that is many years old, and we've had so many challenges to overcome, whether it's utility relocation, whether it's land acquisition, whether it's, understanding complicated regulatory schemes and regimens, whether it's basically understanding how to have a framework agreement so that all the parties know what the project is about and what we're trying to accomplish. We've done that. So where we are right now is we're building the darn thing. And we're building the thing in a way that for the first time is visible. You can go to Southwest Detroit, or you can go to Ontario and see two piers, rising from the ground that are about 270 feet tall. The state-of-the-art infrastructure projects are now well under construction. State-of-the-art bridge overpasses are well under construction that I think will surprise people as to just their quality and their multi-purpose uses. And so we're making tons of progress steadily and surely.
When you talk about some of those challenges, both regulatory, environmental mitigation, land acquisition, working with the neighborhoods and working with Canada, where our partners with the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority have been so good at communicating and understanding the needs for community benefits, all those things. But could you have dreamed coming into this that here we share a border, we share so many customs, we share a language, yet so many times it seems like we're not speaking the same language? I mean, what kind of a challenge has that been?
It's been a challenge that I've frankly confronted my entire career as a commercial litigator, because I recognize that people who are from the same country, often from the same community, can view things through very different prisms, and that when that happens, there's tons of potential for misunderstanding and dispute. And the key, therefore, and I'm unfortunately in some people's minds pretty good at this, the key is through talking and communication, and to step into the shoes of the other side and say, what are they thinking? What are they looking at? What are their concerns? And for the other side to be willing to do the same. And this project has enjoyed its successes, I believe, because we do that. We are trying to be as empathetic to overcome those differences of perspectives, those barriers, those cultural differences that actually do exist, to forge a shared understanding of facts and a shared vision of what solutions look like. And no project, particularly one as complicated as Gordie Howe or others that I've worked on, will avoid those type of challenges. It's really, how do you forge alliances in a shared language, not English, but a shared language when it comes to problem identification that allows you to identify and solve.
Yeah, we've all learned a lot, that's for sure. Stay with us. We'll have more on the other side of this important message.
Know before you go. Head on over to MyDrive to check out the latest on road construction and possible delays along your route. For a detailed map, head over to michigan.gov/drive. Today
is the day, or actually we're recording on Monday, November 15th. when President Biden will sign this historic infrastructure plan. We should point out, since we talked about the Gordie Howe International Bridge, that it really doesn't have any impact there since Canada is financing that project. But it does have tremendous impact and meaning for Michigan all over the state. So let's listen to something the president had to say Monday at the bill signing.
For all the folks at home, I know this day matters to you as well. The world has changed, and we have to be ready. My fellow Americans today, I want you to know we hear you and we see you. We can do this. We can deliver real results for real people. We see in ways that really matter each and every day to each person out there. And we're taking a monumental step forward to build back better as a nation.
What do you think, based on what you've seen so far, is the best thing about the plan?
I think what it is a blueprint for priorities about infrastructure investments that, will be applicable in every single state that allow us to basically improve people's lives. And you said at the beginning that, some people might not see the interesting, aspects of infrastructure. But I personally look at, infrastructure through the lens of, concern and community. Because what really it is connecting people, places, and things so that we can have better lives. So if you look at what the infrastructure legislation is doing, it's connecting people through high-speed internet. It's connecting people through obviously better bridges, through high-speed rail. And it's doing so in a way that takes into account the need to start pivoting to alternative energy and taking into account climate change. So for all those reasons, Michigan is going to be benefiting because all of the people in the state and all of the things that we have need to be better connected. It's spiritually important, it's logistically important, it's economically important, it's important for all those reasons. And if this gives us a really good head start in making our state a better, more connected state, that's just awesome. We have to implement it. It's got to be implemented, in a smart way, in an efficient way. But man, what an opportunity we've got, and let's make the most of it.
Amen. Really well said. I think you're right about connections too. In fact, I almost think maybe they should have thought about incorporating a C into that acronym somehow to really put a fine point on the human element, and that's what the connections are.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
What I was going to say is I start and end my class at the U of M Law School about talking about the issue of connections. And connections are really it's a synonym for relationships. And that's why I think this infrastructure is about how we relate to each other as a society. And I personally, as someone who's watched this legislation so closely for so many months, am thrilled that it's bipartisan, particularly in the Senate. Because in order to have this bill pass, you had to forge real relationships between people who think differently, but are arriving at a set of shared priorities that reflect consensus views of what the role of government is. And therefore, it's really a good reason to celebrate a very, very heartwarming milestone, I think.
Well, thanks, Andy. I think that's helpful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again for listening to this week's edition of the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I would like to thank Randy Dubler and Corey Peaty for engineering this week's podcast. To subscribe to show notes and more, go to Apple Podcasts and search for Talking Michigan Transportation.